Through this correspondence, which Nivea violated with impunity at regular intervals, she learned about the hazards of a miner's life, always dreading avalanches, pursuing elusive veins, asking for credit against good luck that was still to come, and trusting that someday he would strike a marvellous seam of gold that would allow him to become a rich man overnight and return to lead Rosa by the arm to the altar, thus becoming the happiest man in the universe, as he always wrote at the end of his letters. Rosa, however, was in no rush to marry, and had all but forgotten the only kiss they had exchanged when they said goodbye, nor could she recall the colour of her tenacious suitor's eyes. Because of the romantic novels that were her only reading matter, she liked to picture him in thick-soled boots, his skin tanned from the desert winds, clawing the earth in search of pirates' treasure, Spanish doubloons and Incan jewels. It was useless for Nivea to attempt to convince her that the wealth of mines lay in rocks, because to Rosa it was inconceivable that Esteban Truba would spend years piling up boulders in the hope that, by subjecting them to God only knew what wicked incinerating processes, they would eventually spit out a gram of gold. Meanwhile, she awaited him without boredom, unperturbed by the enormous task she had taken upon herself, to embroider the largest tablecloth in the world. She had begun with dogs, cats, and butterflies, but soon her imagination had taken over, and her needle had given birth to a whole paradise filled with impossible creatures that took shape beneath her father's worried eyes. Severo felt that it was time for his daughter to shake off her lethargy, stand firmly in reality, and learn the domestic skills that would prepare her for marriage. But Nivea thought differently. She preferred not to torment her daughter with earthly demands, for she had a premonition that her daughter was a heavenly being, and that she was not destined to last very long in the vulgar traffic of this world. For this reason she left her alone with her embroidery threads, and said nothing about Rosa's nightmarish zoology. A bone in Nivea's corset snapped, and the point jabbed her in the ribs. She felt she was choking in her blue velvet dress, with its high lace collar, its narrow sleeves, and a waist so tight that when she removed her belt, her stomach jumped and twisted for half an hour while her organs fell back in place. She had often discussed this with her suffragette friends, and they had all agreed that until women shortened their dresses and their hair and stopped wearing corsets, it made no difference if they studied medicine or had the right to vote, because they would not have the strength to do it. But she herself was not brave enough to be among the first to give up the fashion. She noticed that the voice from Galicia had ceased hammering at her brain. They were in one of those long breaks in the sermon that the priest, a connoisseur of unbearable silences, used with frequency and to great effect. His burning eyes glanced over the parishioners one by one. Nivea dropped Clara's hand and pulled a handkerchief from her sleeve to blot the drop of sweat that was rolling down her neck. The silence grew thick, and time seemed to stop within the church, but no one dared to cough or shift position so as to not attract Father Restrepo's attention. His final sentences were still ringing between the columns. Just at that moment, as Nivea would recall years later, in the midst of all that anxiety and silence, the voice of little Clara was heard in all its purity. "Psst! Father Estribro! If that story about hell is a lie, we're all fucked, aren't we?" The Jesuit's index finger, which was already raised to illustrate additional tortures, remained suspended like a lightning rod above his head. People stopped breathing, and those whose heads had been nodding suddenly woke up. Signor and Signora Del Val were the first to react. They were swept by panic as they saw their children fidget nervously. Severo understood that he must act before collective laughter broke out around them, or some divine cataclysm occurred. He grabbed his wife by the arm and Clara by the neck and walked out, dragging them behind him with enormous strides, followed by his other children, who stampeded towards the door.